It had been in the 1920s that Aston Martin had produced a single-seater. There had been an experimental car for Reg Parnell in '56, but now Astons were looking at Grand Prix racing with a front-engined 2.5-litre car. Considered by many to be the most beautiful of all the 2.5-litre front-engine cars, this car was perhaps produced some 2 years after the time that it could and should have been a dominant force in Grand Prix racing. Roy Salvadori did most of the testing. He's seen here in the very early stages of development with the car at Goodwood. This was his views on how Aston went Grand Prix racing.
The car was 2.5 litres, of course, to comply with the Formula One regulations. And my first impression of the car was good. The road holding was excellent, and the brakes were absolutely fabulous. They really were good. And all round, I thought that we had a competitive car. In early 1959, the major concentration was still on the sports cars, and with a full team of DBR1s being prepared for the sports car championship races, including, of course, Le Mans, Nürburgring and Goodwood, most of the work was concerned with these activities. Silverstone, May 1959. Aston Martin entered 2 Formula One cars as well as sports cars. Rather an undertaking. They had only a limited number of mechanics to cope with all this. The international trophy race was for 50 laps of the Silverstone circuit, 150 miles, and the full Grand Prix circus had entered. We had done very well in practice and ended up in the front row of the grid with Sterling Moss in the BRM, Tony Brooks in the Ferrari, myself with the Aston, and Jack Brabham the new rear-engine Cooper. I made a good start and ran third behind Jack and Sterling, but Sterling only lasted a couple of laps and went out with brake failure, so I continued to follow Jack quite closely. And so the race finished, with me being second to Jack. However, I did make fastest lap, which equaled the circuit lap record. At the presentation, I was given 2 very nice trophies, which were immediately snatched by Reg Parnell. It was the last I saw of those. But I really need to have pleasant memories of this race because it was the greatest success we were ever to achieve with a Formula One car.
Now, 1959 was quite important from my point of view because Aston's, for some extraordinary reason, didn't want to go to Nürburgring. And I knew that, you know, they had to have a jolly good chance of winning. In fact, I was so convinced that I actually offered to pay myself, and that's a pretty big move for me, I can tell you, to sort of say, well, I'll underwrite the cost of this. And they did allow the car to go, and I went along with Jack Fairman, who unfortunately put the car in the ditch, but great credit to him, he managed to, by a superhuman effort, get it out. After quite a while, all right, we dropped from lead. I was leading, we dropped back to 14th or something. But I was so convinced in the pits that this was it. And I was furious, you know. I mean, here I thought we were going to win the race. I took my helmet off, goggles off, gloves off, earplugs out, and suddenly somebody shouts, you know, when it was all put away in my case, the car's coming in. So I had to get all dressed up again and go out. So really, it was one of my most enjoyable efforts, I suppose, because it gave me the opportunity of leading and then fighting to come back from well down. And then I gave over to Jack again just for 1 lap to make it legal. And then we dropped back to second, so I had another chance at having a go at catching up the winner. And I enjoy those sort of races where it's really competitive, where I'm racing and one can, you know, have a go. And I remember another thing which was amusing. John Wire didn't come. It wasn't considered sufficiently important, and he sent Reg Parnell. And again, they've done what they always do. They put in too high a gear. So I came in and I said to Reg Parnell after practice, I said, Reg, we need to go down 2 ratios, which is a lot. So he said, oh, okay, all right, we'll do it. So I'd go out the next day and no way he'd done it. He'd only dropped 1. Well, of course, you can tell you're a driver. So I came in after practice. He said, how is it? I said, well, the car's handling beautifully, but I'm afraid you're going to have to change the engine. He said, why? I said, well, I know you changed the gear ratio and I can't get the revs. And so he had to admit that he'd only actually changed 1 ratio, and then he did change to the other. And because if you're driving, you can limit your revs. And I knew the lower one was the better one for the circuit, and we did win it, so it was paid off.
And Sterling breaks his last year's lap record no less than 16 times, leaving it at 89.17 miles an hour. The Union Jack flies triumphant over the Nürburgring to mark the 3rd successive victory by Aston Martin in the 1,000-kilometer race. From Germany to France, and that motor racing marathon, Le Mans. On the 8.35-mile circuit of the South, with its surface as smooth as the Nürburgring's is rough, and where the driver differential counts for less, and flat-out speed for more. But Moss and the Aston Martin set a cracking pace, in more senses of the word than one, as he lures the Ferrari opposition into the fatal strategic error of going too fast, too soon.
It was Sterling's job to try and tease the Ferraris, and he did a very good job there, and they started to break up. They were involved in the initial dice with Sterling, and they began to break up, and we took the lead before midnight, and felt very happy about it. We just had the Jean de Bian Hill car to contend with. The rest of the Ferraris were out. But early in the morning, the car started to vibrate badly, and I immediately thought it was the gearbox again. I thought, no, we've got a gearbox problem. And I came into the pits and reported this, but you have to do so many laps before you're allowed to refuel, and they sent me, they couldn't find anything wrong with the car and sent me on. I was going very slower and slower because the car was vibrating to pieces. And we lost a lot of time making 2 more pit stops before we discovered that it was a tire that had been, that started to break up. Obviously, I'd been over some metal, or maybe a blow-up somewhere, and maybe nuts and bolts or conrods, whatever might have been on the road, and I'd cut the tire rather badly, and that started to lose chunks of rubber, and that was causing the vibration. They weren't looking for this because we were fairly confident in our tires, so that's the last thing they looked at. Once that was found, we were in a position to chase again, but that lost us almost 15 minutes. So from then on, we had to drive really hard. We really drove almost like you drive in a sprint until the Ferrari broke. We were catching the Ferrari. All the time we were catching the Ferrari, not enough to have won the race, but enough to make sure that the Ferrari didn't ease up. It had to go at its full pace. Eventually the Ferrari broke, and then we slowed right down. Absolutely, the last 4 hours we were creeping around. We just didn't want anything to happen to the car. You know, I think that for me, Le Mans is not the greatest race. I'd love to have said that I'd won at Nürburgring. I've always envied Sterling Moss and his string of victories at Nürburgring. That was a man's circuit. I finished 2nd there on a couple of occasions, but I'd love to have won a race at Nürburgring. I think that's an achievement. Le Mans is just great to be a winner, and there's a tremendous amount of prestige, but it doesn't compare with the Nürburgring circuit.
On the 5th and final round of the World Sports Car Championship for 1959, to be run over the Goodwood circuit of 2.4 miles to the lap. A 6-hour race and a 3-cornered battle between the Astons, with 16 points towards the title from their victories at Nürburg and Le Mans. And Ferrari, the holders of the title, with 18 points, but with only 1 outright win gained at Sebring. And the Targa Florio winners, the little silver Porsches, best suited by the circuit, with 15 points. And when Sterling goes, they all go, although the flag's still up. At St Mary's it's Moss, then Shelby, and the field string out behind. Lap 1 completed. Aston's are first, second and fourth. And the only thing that's tourist about this trophy is its name. Just one lap gone, and fate strikes at Ferrari as Phil Hill retires with engine failure, just as Moss and Shelby come round the second time. The peaceful Sussex countryside echoes to the strange and stirring sounds of machinery far less agricultural than it's used to. "20 laps, and Moss leads Gurney's Ferrari by 30 seconds. And Von Tripp's Porsche by 60 seconds, as it goes through St. Mary's ahead of Whitehead's Aston and John de Bien's Ferrari. Moss on the Aston, leading at an average of nearly 92 miles an hour. Shelby in second place ably backs him up as he too races down the straight to Woodcote and onto the chicane to the pits, where Jack Fairman waits to take over number 2. As smooth as well-oiled silk, the pit crew go about their jobs, aided by the new compressed airlift jacks that raise all 4 wheels in half a second. Goodwood's abrasive surface calls for frequent tyre changes. Fairman gets away in a fraction over 32 seconds. Meantime, Brooks on Ferrari number 9 finds it quite a handful on the sinuous Goodwood circuit. Over at St. Mary's, Aston number 3 runs steadily in 4th place. And now Salvadori waits for Sterling. And here he comes after 47 laps. 3 wheels are changed, the car refueled in a time of 41 seconds. And without losing the lead, Aston number 1 rejoins the race with Salvadori at the wheel. With 2.5 hours gone, the average drops to 90.67 miles an hour. Aston still lie first and second. Third is the Bonnier Von Tripp's Porsche, number 22, 2 laps behind the leader. Out in the country, a Jaguar prowls. As back at the pits, Salvadori brakes and brings the Aston in for its routine stop. A split second later, the car's a sheet of flame. His overalls ablaze, Salvadori hurls himself out and rolls upon the ground. Moss rushes to his aid as firemen fight the blaze. Black smoke clouds billow upwards, a deadly, silent signal that speaks far louder than words, leaving chaos in its wake, and a challenge impossible to ignore.
I went around in the Aston Martin pit, because the food was always frightfully good there. And then when one of the cars came in and they were refueling it and it caught fire and the whole pit's caught on fire and that sort of thing. And John Wire said, "We've got to stop this fire spreading," you know, and handed me a bloody great 14-pound axe, and I started chopping down the roof supports, the timber roof supports. But somebody else was busy doing the same thing, and the next thing I knew was this great lump of, you know, the roof came in and hit me on the head, knocked me out, and I finished up in the hospital bay with Salvadori.
In 1959, to begin another desperate drive to retrieve the Aston fortunes. For nothing less than an outright win can bring the World Championship to Britain. A second place is not enough. Now the little Porsche leads the race. And Ferrari number 10 lies third. Down the Lavant straight races the Porsche. A relentless Moss behind it, reducing its lead with every lap. And now, the Aston leads again. But a slender lead, for Moss must come in to refuel and change wheels again. And the Ferrari is too close for comfort, and the Porsche remains an ever-present threat. Little more than an hour to go, and Gregory's Tajero Jag goes off course at Woodcote. Less than an hour to go, and Sterling and the Aston make their lap total 188, as into the pits they go for the final routine stop. Victory lies an hour away. Aston Martin have never lost a long-distance race at Goodwood, and Sterling is determined that this race will prove no exception to that rule. 5 more minutes to go. Moss is on his way at an average of 89.41 miles an hour to win his 5th TT and score Aston Martin's 3rd TT win. The flag falls. The last mile of many thousands of racing miles is covered that have gone to make a triple triumph that brings to Britain for the very first time the Sports Car Championship of the world. The Aston Martins of David Brown have earned an everlasting and an honoured place in the hall of motor racing fame.